The whimpering was faint, almost swallowed by the wind rustling through the tall grass. Marla froze, one foot sinking slightly into the soft earth behind the crumbling shed. She had been walking the old fence line, checking traps for a missing stray, when the sound stopped her cold. Heart pounding, she crouched low, peering into the shadows beneath the collapsed boards. Two golden eyes blinked back at her from the darkness. That was when the memories hit, the old intake photo from years ago, a golden pup in a red collar, wagging uncertainly behind chain link. She had always wondered what happened to him after the family moved. The yard had gone silent, until now, a flash of movement, then silence again. Marla gently called out, her voice carried off by the breeze. She edged closer, her breath misting in the autumn chill. Underneath the shed, something shifted. A paw pushed forward. And with it, a dirt-covered strip of fabric. It was red. The backyard had long since surrendered to time. Once neatly trimmed and bustling with weekend barbecues and children's games, it now lay smothered under a thicket of weeds, rusted tools, and forgotten toys swallowed by the soil. Marla's boots crunched over brittle leaves as she moved cautiously, eyes scanning the ground, breath sharp in the cool air. The old property had been abandoned for over 5 years, set to be demolished next week, but for now, it held one last secret. Marla had volunteered at the shelter for nearly a decade. She had seen dogs come in broken, terrified, wild-eyed, some left with wagging tails. Some never left at all, but this case had rattled her. The reports of distant barking, the single blurry motion-activated photo from a neighbor's wildlife cam, the shadowy shape near the shed, no collar, no tag, just a faint outline of hope. She adjusted her scarf, her breath rising in pale spirals. The shed loomed ahead, its roof bowed in the middle, planks rotting at the corners. She moved closer, her steps silent on the soft earth. That was when she heard it. A low, uneven whimper, the kind that came from somewhere deep inside, born of pain and patience. Marla crouched, brushing aside a curtain of hanging vines. Her heart stuttered. Beneath the shed, pressed into a hollow scraped from dirt and leaves, were two golden eyes locked onto hers. Wide, still, waiting, she did not speak. She had learned long ago that silence, when filled with kindness, could carry further than words. Slowly, she sat back on her heels, letting her presence settle into the space like dust. The dog did not move. From this angle, all she could see was a matted golden muzzle streaked with gray and dirt, and one paw slightly raised, as if caught mid-step years ago and never put down. Marla's mind raced. The intake photo. The pup in the red collar, left behind in a rush. This had to be him. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a plastic baggie filled with shredded chicken, the good kind she only brought for cases like this. She pinched off a piece and laid it gently just beyond the opening. Then another. Then one more, a soft trail leading away from the dark. But the dog did not budge. Instead, the paw inched forward and pushed something outward. A crumpled length of fabric stiff with age and dirt. She leaned closer. It was red, faded, frayed, a collar. Her throat tightened. She eased back, letting the moment breathe. This was not about rushing. This was about trust, chipped away over years, trying to be rebuilt in a handful of cold November minutes. She whispered his name. Not aloud, just in her heart. Rusty. As the sun dipped lower, the backyard grew colder. Marla laid out a blanket near the edge of the shed and sat down, arms wrapped around her knees, not too close, not too far. She would wait. Sometimes that was all a dog needed to know, that someone would wait. Minutes passed, then an hour, then two. The wind shifted and the sounds of the town curled in the distance. A train horn, a barking dog, a child's laugh carried far too faint to follow. The whimpering returned once, shorter this time, followed by the sound of something shifting under the boards. She leaned forward just slightly. A nose emerged, trembling, twitching, then a paw, then he stopped again. The light was nearly gone when Marla noticed something else. In the dirt beside the shed, barely covered by leaves, was a shallow trench of paw prints worn into the same pattern. Forward, back, forward again. Days of pacing in and out. He had not been trapped. He had chosen to stay, to guard this hollow, to wait. She did not understand why until the wind kicked up and swept aside a blanket of dry grass. Beside the shed, sunken into the earth, lay the shattered remains of an old plastic doghouse. Half buried, half collapsed, but unmistakable, Rusty's old shelter. This was not just where he hid. This was home. Marla blinked away, the sting in her eyes. Somewhere behind her, a branch snapped. A squirrel darted across the fence line. The moment was broken. She turned back to the shed. Rusty was gone, not far, but back into the shadows. She stood slowly, gathering the untouched food and folding her blanket with care. She would come back tomorrow and the next day. Every day until the bulldozers came. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye just at the edge of the opening. Another object had been nudged out. A toy, blue plastic cracked down the middle, a chewed-up bone with teeth marks still visible. He was telling her something, and she was starting to understand. The morning broke with a brittle light, filtering through a pale sky that carried the threat of rain. Marla returned with her boots still damp from dew and a new plan stitched together in her thoughts overnight. Rusty was not just any stray. He had returned here for a reason. Something tethered him to this overgrown yard, and whatever it was, it ran deeper than hunger or fear. She stepped over the gate, its hinges rusted solid, and moved through the brush with practiced care. The shed looked smaller in the daylight, but no less broken. She paused 10 paces away and sat cross-legged on the same folded blanket. She placed a clean bowl of water within reach, then laid out fresh chicken, not in a trail this time, but in a soft half-circle outside the opening. She waited. Wind whispered through the branches. A crow called out once and flew overhead. Minutes passed with no sign, but she had brought something else, a copy of the intake form. It had been printed years ago, faded and coffee-stained, but she had never forgotten the photo. A young golden retriever mix, floppy ears, nose smudged with dirt, staring into the camera with a mixture of confusion and trust. The form listed his name, Rusty. Marla pulled out a scrap of cardboard and a thick black marker. On it she wrote one word. Then she set it gently in the dirt just outside the shed. Rusty. The shadows stirred. At first it was only movement, then breath, soft and steady. Then, gradually, Rusty's face emerged, his nose quivering in the breeze. He saw the food. He saw the water, but it was the cardboard sign that held him still. Marla felt something shift. Recognition, not in his eyes, not yet, but in his stillness. A memory flickering in the space between breath and bark. Dogs remember more than we think. Scent, voice, places, names. She did not speak. He stepped out just slightly, one paw then another. His fur was dull with grime and flecked with burrs, but his frame was solid, thin, yes, but not skeletal. He had survived out here on instinct and silence. Marla did not move. He sniffed the water. Then cautiously he drank, a long, careful drink that made her throat ache in sympathy. Then he turned to the food and took a single bite before retreating halfway back into the dark. It was a start. The next few hours passed in stillness. She shifted once, legs growing stiff, but otherwise stayed silent. She watched him and he watched her. Sometimes his eyes closed and his head drooped, but he never turned his back. By noon she stood and left slowly, leaving behind more food and the blanket. She came back at dusk. The food was gone, the toy had been pulled halfway back inside the shed, and the cardboard sign was missing. Marla knelt to check, her fingers brushing the disturbed earth. Then she saw it. Just beneath the shed's lip, half buried in the dirt, was the sign, pulled close to his makeshift den, like something worth keeping. She exhaled softly. A quiet kind of joy bloomed in her chest. This time she brought something more, a trail camera, not for surveillance, just to understand his patterns. She affixed it carefully to the trunk of a nearby tree, angling it to face the shed. Then she slipped away again, whispering goodbye in her mind. That night, back at the shelter, Marla loaded the footage. It was grainy in places, but the time-stamped images told a story. At midnight, Rusty emerged. He circled the yard 3 times, pausing by the doghouse ruins. He nosed at a patch of earth, then lay down beside it, not inside the shed, beside the graveyard of memories. At 2 in the morning, he got up. He pulled the chewed blue toy closer to the sign that said his name. Then he vanished back beneath the boards. Marla stared at the screen long after the video stopped. There was grief there, not just survival. Grief and something like faith, the faith that someone, someday, might remember his name. She returned the next morning with something new, a low plastic crate with a blanket inside, placed a safe distance from the shed. A small shelter, a compromise. She left another bowl of food. This time beef. She backed away and waited. Rusty emerged again, quicker this time, less crouched. He ate in full view, then slowly walked to the crate and sniffed it. He turned once, looked toward the shed, then lay down halfway in, not all the way, but enough. Marla's eyes stung again. Progress, but time was running out. The demolition permit had been approved. In 5 days, the shed and the house would be leveled. She had until then to earn his trust. Or he would disappear again, or worse, be caught in the noise and chaos of tearing down the only place that still held meaning. That night, she filed for a temporary delay on the demolition, citing wildlife interference. It might buy her 1 more week. She would need every hour of it, because when she returned on day 3, the crate was overturned. The food was untouched, and there were fresh prints in the mud, not from a dog, from boots. Marla stared at the boot prints, her stomach turning to lead. They cut across the muddy ground in wide, deliberate strides, trampling the trail she had so carefully built. The prints led to the shed, then away again, disappearing near the fence. Too fresh to be old, too careless to be hers. She knelt beside them, brushing at the edges, deep impressions, adult-sized. Whoever had come here was not hiding their presence. She scanned the fence line. No sign of broken boards or forced entry, but it was easy enough to climb if someone wanted to snoop around. And people did sometimes, curious neighbors, teenagers chasing legends, or worse, scavengers hoping to find copper piping in the soon-to-be-demolished house. But that was not what this felt like. Rusty's crate was flipped, his food untouched, his blanket half-dragged into the weeds like something struggled there. Her heart pounded in her ears. She moved toward the shed, calling softly in her mind, not aloud. Her boots sank slightly in the damp earth as she circled. The opening was darker than before, still empty. Then came the faintest scuff, a shift of dirt. He was still under there. Marla sank to her knees and leaned low, brushing aside the hanging vines and twisted wood. Rusty's eyes appeared wide and glassy. He was farther back than usual, deeper in the hollow, nearly invisible in shadow. He was afraid. The trust they had built had cracked. She stayed there for nearly an hour, not moving, not speaking, just breathing alongside him. He did not come out. But he did not look away. When she finally rose, she gathered the food and water bowl untouched and left the crate where it lay. There was no point today in trying again. The fear was too raw. That night she filed a report with the local board managing the property, citing evidence of trespassing and requesting an inspection. Whether it would delay the demolition further, she did not know. But it was worth the attempt. Every day mattered. Back at the shelter, she loaded the trail cam footage. What she saw turned her blood cold. At just past midnight, Rusty emerged from under the shed, nose low, ears back. He walked cautiously toward the food. Then a sudden burst of movement, a figure stepping into the frame from the right. Hoodie, gloves, tall. The person lunged, and Rusty bolted back into the shed in a flash of gold and fear. The figure stood over the food, then crouched. A glint of metal, a trap. They had tried to set a trap. Marla's hands trembled. She reported the footage immediately. There was no face. No license plate. But now it was more than trespassing, it was cruelty. The next morning she arrived before dawn. This time she brought company. Jordan, another longtime volunteer and former vet tech, stood beside her, arms folded, eyes scanning the property. He had a quiet strength Marla appreciated. He had worked on cases like this before, dogs terrified enough to dig their own graves, and humans reckless enough to ignore them. They moved slowly toward the shed. Rusty did not emerge. Jordan crouched beside the overturned crate. He lifted it gently, then inspected the blanket, teeth marks. He raised an eyebrow. Trap probably caught his scent, he said, voice low. Scared him worse than we thought. Marla nodded. I just need to get him out before they tear this place down. Jordan turned to her. We need a containment plan. If we try to grab him now, he will bolt. But if we wait too long, his voice trailed off. She knew what he meant. They set up a humane enclosure, a wire pen left open, baited with treats and Rusty's familiar blanket. A trail of soft food led from the shed to the pen's center. It was not meant to trap. It was meant to invite. They left it there and backed off. Marla sat at her usual place, the blanket now weather-worn and dusted with dried leaves. She waited again, hour after hour, the cold pressing into her bones. Still, he did not come. By late afternoon, the clouds had thickened, and the first drops of rain began to fall. She closed her eyes and listened. There, a shuffle, she opened them slowly. Rusty stood at the shed's edge, soaked, shivering. His paws were muddy and his coat clung tight to his sides, but his eyes, those eyes, locked with hers. He stepped forward, one paw, then another, then a pause, another step. He followed the trail, slowly, carefully, not trusting it fully but compelled by need. He reached the enclosure's edge. Marla held her breath. He stepped inside. He sniffed the blanket, then curled onto it, not entirely relaxed but present. Visible, vulnerable. She waited, not moving, not speaking. The rain picked up, cold and relentless. Still, she did not move. Only when Rusty lowered his head and closed his eyes did she exhale. It was not over, not yet. But this was something more than progress. This was surrender. And surrender, for a dog like Rusty, was the bravest act of all. By morning, the rain had settled into a slow drizzle, beating on the leaves and turning the backyard into a patchwork of mud and puddles. Marla returned just after sunrise, her coat zipped tight, her breath curling in the damp air. She clutched a thermos of warm broth and a small bundle of towels. Today felt like a turning point. Rusty had spent the night in the pen, not confined, not caged, but choosing to stay. That mattered. The enclosure remained untouched. No signs of interference, no footprints that did not belong. And Rusty, curled on the blanket, eyes blinking slowly in the gray light, looked up as she approached, not startled. Not panicked. Just watching. She crouched outside the wire, setting the thermos down beside her. She poured a small amount of broth into a plastic bowl and pushed it gently inside the pen. Rusty sniffed the air, then rose with stiff limbs and padded over. He drank, lips smacking softly, tail still low but not tucked. Marla reached out just enough to rest her hand near the edge of the enclosure. Not inside, just close. An invitation without pressure. Rusty glanced at her, then lowered himself to the blanket again. For the first time, she noticed the scars. Thin lines beneath the fur, a healed nick on his ear, a patch along his rib that grew hair thinner than the rest. The past had not just left emotional marks. It had carved itself into his skin. She swallowed hard. She checked the camera footage from overnight. Nothing out of the ordinary. No shadows where they did not belong. No figures in the dark. Just Rusty, pacing now and then, lying down, rising again, sleeping in fits like an animal long used to danger. Jordan joined her an hour later. He brought a low carrier and soft leash, just in case, but Marla was not ready, not yet. He is starting to believe, she said, voice quiet. Jordan nodded. Then let's not rush the moment. They waited until afternoon, watching Rusty move in slow circuits within the pen. He would pause by the open gate, glance back toward the shed, then return to his blanket. That loop repeated every hour, like he was caught between instinct and memory. When Marla stepped inside the pen, slowly, crouched low, Rusty did not bolt. She sat across from him and laid the leash on the ground between them. Then she began to hum, a lullaby, nothing specific, just soft notes rising and falling, something a mother might hum when words failed. Rusty tilted his head. She kept going, eyes never meeting his directly, just letting the sound fill the space between them. He moved closer, not fast. Not curious, just drawn. Then he lay down within reach. Marla did not reach yet. She let the moment hold. Then, as the wind whispered through the trees and the drizzle softened, she slowly extended her hand, palm up, fingers loose. Rusty sniffed it. Then gently he placed his chin across her wrist. Her eyes closed. She did not cry, not yet, not while he was watching. But her heart cracked open in that quiet act of trust. Jordan watched from the gate, arms folded tight. He is yours now, he said softly, but she knew better. No, she was his. The next morning, the demolition crew arrived early. Marla had filed for another delay, citing the documented evidence of active rescue, but city timelines rarely bent for sentiment. The contractor gave her one more day. After that, the machines would come. It was not enough time, unless Rusty was ready to leave. She returned that evening with a plan: the leash, the carrier, a warm blanket, and the crate prepped at the shelter with food and soft lighting. Rusty greeted her at the pen gate. He stood as she approached, tail giving a cautious wag. His fur was damp, but his eyes were brighter today. Less fog, more focus. She sat beside him, opened the thermos, poured the broth again, let him drink. Then she reached for the leash, slowly, gently. She looped it over his neck. He tensed, but he did not pull away. She clipped it. Then she whispered without speaking, "It is time." Rusty stood. Together they walked, not hurried, not afraid, toward the shelter van waiting just outside the gate. The moment his paw crossed the threshold of the crate inside the van, she let the tears come, not because it was over, but because something had finally begun. The shelter was quiet when they arrived, long after dark. A light drizzle still fell, pattering gently on the roof as Marla guided Rusty into the intake room. Air was warm, filled with the subtle scent of lavender spray and worn blankets, a far cry from the bitter wind and hollow boards he had known under the shed. She opened the crate door and stepped back. Rusty hesitated. Then, with a low breath, he stepped out. Each paw landed softly on the clean floor, claws clicking once, then stopping. He sniffed the air, turning slowly in place. Not afraid, not eager, just watchful. Marla had cleared this space for him. No barking dogs, no metal gates clanging. Just one corner, layered with fleece and old toys, a heater humming low nearby. She had even placed his chewed blue bone and the weathered red collar, cleaned but unchanged, on the blanket. Rusty saw them. He padded over and lay down, curling around the toy like it still meant something. Maybe it did. Marla sat a few feet away, arms wrapped around her knees. She said nothing. There was no need. The silence between them had grown familiar now, rich with meaning. Trust did not need volume. The next few days passed in quiet rhythms. Rusty ate with steady appetite. He drank. He slept. He stretched out under the heat lamp, paws twitching in dreams. He did not bark. He barely made a sound, but when Marla entered the room, his ears perked. His eyes softened. She took photos, not for records, but for moments. Rusty blinking into the sunlight pouring through the shelter's skylight. Rusty sniffing at his reflection in the metal water bowl. Rusty resting his muzzle on Marla's foot during an evening shift change. The demolition went forward 2 days later. She did not go, she could not. Instead, she brought Rusty a small scrap of siding from the shed, one piece of his past, just enough to carry forward. She placed it gently near his blanket. He sniffed it once, then lay down beside it without fuss. That weekend, a potential adopter came. An older couple, kind smiles, soft voices. They had seen the flyers, read his story. They brought treats and sat on the floor just like Marla did. Rusty approached them cautiously, sniffed, sat. But he kept looking back at her, and she knew it was not time, not yet, maybe not ever. The shelter director pulled her aside the next day. "You know he is bonded," she said, "to you." Marla nodded slowly. "I know he could still be adopted, but it has to be right." She nodded again. "It does." Weeks passed. The days grew colder. Holiday decorations appeared on the shelter's walls. Rusty's fur grew glossier, his eyes more alert. He played gently with a stuffed fox. He wagged at the door when Marla arrived. He followed her down the hallways, slow and steady, like he belonged there. One evening, after closing, Marla took him for a walk around the fenced yard. The sky was low and gray, snow threatening on the edges of the horizon. Rusty moved slowly but with purpose, nose to the wind, tail flicking softly. She crouched beside him. "Is this home now?" she asked without voice. He looked up at her, then did something he had never done before. He leaned in, placing his full weight against her side. A gentle press. Solid, warm, choosing, she pressed her face into his fur and nodded. 3 weeks later, the paperwork was finalized. The collar, cleaned, repaired, still red, was buckled gently around his neck. A new tag clinked softly beneath it. Not just a name now, a family, her family. She took him home that night to her quiet apartment, small, warm, scattered with second-hand furniture and soft rugs. Rusty sniffed every corner. Then he found a spot near the heater and curled into it like he had always been there. In a way, he had. He slept through the night. In the morning, Marla woke to the sound of slow, soft breathing beside her bed. She looked down. Rusty was watching her. He blinked once. She reached down and let her hand rest on his head. And in that silent moment, where whimpering had once lived, there was only peace.